Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest.
And by the way, I think I could say that there are certain groups of people that don't take vaccines and don't take any pills that have no autism. Is that a correct statement, by the way?
September 25th, 2025, the Tough It Out Pregnant Ladies edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast. The dogs have been shooed away from Emily Bazelon of Yale University Law School and New York Times Magazine. Hello, Emily.
Hey, David.
Did anyone ever tell you to tough it out when you were pregnant with the Bazelon children?
No, don't start that topic too early.
Okay, I won't. That's John Dickerson, co-anchor of the CBS Evening News and anchor of CBS Evening News Plus from New York City. We will not start that topic too early.
On the streets, the dogs are barking.
What is that? What reference is that?
People will get it. Carry on.
This week on the Gabfest, we'll dig into the latest horrid developments in the American justice system, with the president now ordering prosecutions of his guilty as hell political enemies. In addition to believing he is the nation's lawyer, President Trump also believes he is the nation's obstetrician and pediatrician. So we will talk about the latest shocking developments about autism and vaccination that the president is orchestrating. Then we're going to talk to the brilliant historian Bev Gage about what the Red Scare was and what it can tell us about the Trump administration's burgeoning crackdown on left-wing organizations and on speech that they don't like. Plus, we'll have cocktail chatter. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise.
The spirit of innovation is deeply ingrained in America, and Google is helping Americans innovate in ways both big and small. From improving emergency response times to protecting against cyber attacks, local, state, and federal governments are innovating with Google AI. This is a new era of American innovation. Find out more at g.co/American Innovation.
President Trump, who is committed to using all the tools of government against his political enemies, took a shocking step even for him this week. He pushed out a respected, very conservative U.S. attorney in Virginia who had declined to file criminal charges against two of Trump's personal foes, or people he has decided are his personal foes, James Comey and Letitia James. Trump then nominated one of his personal lawyers who has no criminal law experience as a replacement. And then, in an amazing example of saying the quiet part out loud, posted a note to Truth Social directed directly to Attorney General Pam Bondi, essentially ordering her to deliver criminal prosecutions of Comey, of James, and of Adam Schiff, calling them, quote, guilty as hell. And then comes news today on Thursday morning that indeed the Justice Department is preparing to indict Comey for perjury before a statute of limitations expires on Tuesday that would prevent that indictment. So, Emily, there's a kind of game that we've been playing. It's not even a game because it's not funny. But I'll call it a game, which is, what norm did Trump destroy today? Why is this one such a big deal, what he's doing here?
Well, since Watergate, there has been a Bible in the Justice Department. It's now called the Justice Manual, that lays out rules for making sure that there is a separation between the White House and the Justice Department when it comes to who you're going to prosecute, right? So the White House hires the Attorney General, or nominates, I should say. The president nominates the Attorney General and has a lot of say in the policy priorities of the Justice Department, like, we're going after immigration more. No, we're going to do something else. But when it comes to individual criminal prosecutions, since Watergate, when Nixon was forced to resign because his attorney general meddled in a criminal investigation, and this is the burglary break-in of DNC, Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel. Since then, it has been very clear that it's really important for presidents to stay out of these individual decisions, because otherwise you have this huge, very powerful machine of prosecution potentially turned on the president's enemies. I mean, now all the facts you laid out are simply that is exactly what is happening. And so you have a U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, conservative guy, Eric Siebert, following the rules that prosecutors are supposed to follow. This is their professional legal responsibility, that if you investigate someone and then you can't find enough evidence of criminal wrongdoing, then you don't try to indict them. That's how it works. And that was what the conclusion that Eric Siebert came to following his oath of office, which, by the way, is to the Constitution, not Donald Trump. And he's out of there because Trump doesn't like the answer. And so now Trump has brought in a loyalist who's an insurance lawyer, has never, as far as I know, prosecuted a case, who is going to presumably go to the grand jury and try to indict James Comey before the statute of limitations runs out. And it's just a textbook example of what's not supposed to happen.
So Eric Siebert, who has resigned or been pushed out and seems to have acted on principle. There is an earlier step, though, that also seems to me to be alarming, which is that he was essentially investigating the president's enemies to try to find a crime. So that was also not so hotsy-totsy in my view, which is like, instead of like you look at a crime and then see if it's been violated, you look at a person and try to find something they've done wrong.
Yeah, I'm really glad you pointed that out. I mean, what I've been told from other prosecutors is that in this U.S. Attorney's Office and other ones, basically the U.S. attorneys are under all this pressure to indict these various targets who Trump has identified. And so normally, if you're following the rules of the Justice Manual, these sort of vaunted standards of the Justice Department, you do exactly what you said, David. There's criminal wrongdoing and you investigate it because you see a crime. And then whoever you think is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt that you can prove that's who you indict. You start with the deed, not the person. This is reversed. And apparently what some of the U.S. attorneys have concluded is that even if they don't have what's called a factual predicate, a like decent reason to go launch an investigation, since they're being told they absolutely have to do that, they're going to run the whole thing down and investigate anyway. They're going to subpoena witnesses. They're going to scrutinize all these documents. And then they're going to go to their superiors at the main Justice Department, and maybe really to Donald Trump and say, hey, look, this is why we don't think there's enough evidence. In other words, they're building what's called a declination, declining to prosecute instead of a case to prosecute. But the idea that they're doing all this investigating in the first place is alarming in itself because they don't have what you normally would have, this factual predicate to start off a proper inquiry.
We saw this most recently in the Lisa Cook case when, in order to try to get her off the Fed, it seems that the president suggested that his team search for some kind of problem she might have that would allow her to be bounced from the Fed. It's actually a similar problem, the mortgage fraud claim, to the one that has been alleged with Adam Schiff, who was one of the targets of the president's ire. The term hotsy-totsy is not in the actual Department of Justice manual, but it does say...
But it should be.
It should be. The actual quote is, the legal judgments of the Department of Justice must be impartial and insulated from political influence, and its investigatory and prosecutorial powers must be exercised free from partisan consideration. And when you look at what the president ordered his attorney general to do, to your point about reverse engineering a crime, his evidence that he cited for the three people that he wanted the attorney general to go after was that he had been impeached twice and indicted 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served now. So that the thrust of his argument was, the only way you can balance justice is if you go after these people on my behalf, which means that this is not just the president crossing a norm. There's a way in which he believes these things. This to me was always what was interesting about the 2020 election claim. Did he believe that he won the election? Did he actually believe that he won the election in his bones? Or was he using it as a useful way to get reelected by rallying his supporters? Because one is, highly cynical and one is an act of delusion. Does he really believe that this is the way the system should work? Or does he believe, damn it, this is the way I want it to work?
I don't care what he really believes because he is having such an incredibly damaging effect that it does not matter. And all that matters is how the system is going to now respond. And eventually the voters.
The only reason I think that it is interesting is that one is that the evidence of somebody who is completely unhooked from reality, and that could have implications in other realms. So that's why, to me, it seems to be also, in addition to the facts of the case, it's also possibly a window.
Emily, I note that when you described you said this is something that has been in place since Watergate. What John just described, it's filled with should. There should be no whatever. It's a breach of protocol, and one of the articles we were reading, a breach of prosecutorial protocol. But it doesn't seem to be what he's doing against the law. It doesn't appear that there's any clear way to stop him. Why is this not something that is against the law or something that can be policed? In a more functional system, how would what Trump is doing with these, Trump ginned up prosecutions, how would that be stalled? Would it just be public outrage? Is there some role for Congress here? Is there some role?
Congress.
I mean, I think there's a few answers to that. Sure, it could be an impeachable offense. Congress could act. Congress could just put up some kind of resistance. Just merely speaking up among the Republicans of Congress could accomplish something.
But it couldn't
right?
stop him. But I'm saying, but it can't legally stop him, right?
You're talking about legally stopping him versus whether the real answer here is a political one, right? Unless we are going to take the Justice Department out of the executive branch, then the answer is mostly going to be political. It is also true that the legal system may very well prevent these prosecutions from happening, right? I mean, a grand jury has to indict. A judge has to allow these charges to proceed. There is such clear evidence here of a vindictive prosecution that even though that is like barely a thing that anyone ever wins on, it seems like it's glaring here. And the judges in the Eastern District, and also probably the grand jurors, they're hardly going to be blind to all this stuff that's happening. But I mean, I think, David, the sort of essence of your question is about when it's the law and the courts and the legal system that is going to, quote, save us, and when it's the political system, which is really, in this case, Congress and the voters. And I think that is where the answer has got to lie with all of this. When has this just all gone too far and people are going to decide that they've had enough?
John, to ask that question from the political sense, does this politicization of justice, this weaponization of justice, appear to be having any political consequences for Trump? Is this an issue which is damaging for him in a way that he cares about, or in a way that Republican leaders worry about?
I don't think Republican leaders worry about it, because I think they have found a way to survive, or put another way, it is key to their survival, to say a version of either I didn't see the tweet, or this is just him being him, he speaks frankly. And that has been sufficient to protect them politically. I do think there's probably a class, and Emily would know this so much better than me, but a class of Republican supporters of the president who are also supporters of doing things the right way in the legal system, and for whom this is even a bridge too far. But I also think that it has other possible downsides that if they become public enough, it could be damaging more broadly. I don't know whether it's to the president. The president's approval ratings are not so great. So he's getting close to the rock bottom. He has a floor and he's getting close to it. And once he hits that floor, he's not going to go below it. But there are a couple of things that would be interesting to get Emily's help with, which is enumerating all the ways that this hurts the system. So as you pointed out, David, people say, well, this is a breach. We've been saying that. But what does this mean in practical terms? How does this hurt the justice system? It seems like one way it hurts it is it wastes a hell of a lot of time. So a lot of effort is going to go into chasing these prosecutions that aren't well put together, and they will fail, and they could obviously have been figured out beforehand before wasting all that time. That is not going to be spent on doing other things. When you have a U.S. attorney resign because he doesn't want to go this far, you then basically have brain drain, and you get the kind of people that are being put in power who will carry out the president's wishes, who are not as swift, or who just lack the skills to do the job that the Justice Department is supposed to do. And then you could imagine, to the extent that the low opinion people have of the justice system infects the public at large, you start to just basically get the view that the justice system is just basically exists at the whim of whoever's in office, which has, pernicious effects. It also would probably, who's going to cooperate with a justice system that behaves that way? It's your friend one day, it's not your friend the next. And leaving aside just the biggest question of rights and wrongs, I think if the damage to the system that exists as a result of this behavior becomes more public, then perhaps it has a political downside.
Yeah, I mean, all of that and more. I've been doing a lot of reporting, both talking to former top officials in the Justice Department from past administrations, going all the way back to Reagan. And then I've also been talking to a lot of the career attorneys who've either resigned or been fired since Trump took office. There's like 4,000 of them who've resigned and another couple hundred who've been fired. And the bottom is falling out. Like, take this, the former top officials. This is like our national legal establishment, right? These are people in both parties who consider themselves and have been really like custodians of the legal system. And it's protocols, it's standards. Yes, these are not all like things where you break a rule and you go to jail, but they are the things that make the American legal system incredibly strong and important and have been a huge asset, right? I mean, the main important thing about the law is that it's a force for stability. People can build around it. They can trust in some kind of fairness. Sure, not in every case, but basically we're going to have even-handed application of the law. We're not going to go after people for partisan reasons or other just like nefarious, unfair rationales. And all of that is like breaking down in front of their eyes in a way that they never imagined. And on background, when they're not having to think about the effect that talking to me is having on their law firms, because lots of them are currently in legal practice at major firms, which of course, some of which are fighting the Trump administration's crazy orders against the firms, and some of which have capitulated. When they can talk on background, they are just like agonizing and beside themselves about what is happening to their beloved institution and this whole sort of underpinning of the American way of life.
Can I make a sort of distinction, which is, I think it is absolutely the case that this is catastrophic for an incredibly important, stable institution that's been critical for democracy. I don't think, to answer my own question from earlier, that the political consequences for Trump are actually that serious for this reason, which is that one of the most effective tools authoritarians have is cynicism, that the people believe that the system is rigged. And so if you rig the system, if you further rig the system, if you prove it's rigged, you merely confirm people's suspicion that it's rigged. His own cynicism and his cynical behavior compounds their cynicism. And so there's less and less faith in the system for everybody. And that and the less faith there is in any system, the better an authoritarian does. Destroying idealism, destroying the ideals that people have about how systems work is one of the best tools of the authoritarian. So I am sure that there are lots of people who think that what Trump is doing is bad and they don't like it, but I'm not sure it actually, in the end, damages Trump as much as it damages the nation.
Well, we are in a tremendously dangerous moment because of exactly what you said. And we are going to talk more about the Red Scare and McCarthy in a bit. But one of the fundamental, perhaps for me, the most important lesson of Watergate. How did Watergate end? Republican senators went to the White House and told Nixon he had to resign. And his approval ratings were lower, but that was this crucial move, right, John?
Well, yeah, and you didn't have a system that you have now where you have in this case, you have Fox News and an echo chamber that didn't exist during the Nixon years. And you could argue, and I did a piece about this for Sunday Morning, and historians did argue that, if Nixon had the equivalent of Fox News and the echo chamber, he might not have had the situation you describe. But there is another release valve, which is that in the midterm elections, and we obviously see this is why the conversation we had about redistricting in certain places is so important, because the president's party usually loses a great number of seats in an off-year election, non-presidential year election. The Republicans are trying to minimize that by redistricting in some states. But there could be a rallying effect for both Democrats whose party is in a weak situation, but these kinds of instances can rally them around the threat of Donald Trump. And also it does sap some energy from Republicans who are not in the deepest part of the president's base, who one of the things that is being affirmed here is the doom saying of those who said, if Donald Trump gets reelected again, he's going to use the Department of Justice to go after his enemies. And, one response was, that's going too far. Emily, I feel like even some of the people you interviewed before he was reelected said,
yes.
He believes in credentialed people and credentialed people aren't going to do this.
Yes.
And they were 100,000% wrong, which I believe is a new kind of math. And
that's how much you have to pay. You have to pay to get an H-1B.
And so I think that doesn't mean nothing. Even accepting your points, David, I think that might happen in a political context. And I would just add one other thing, that this order to Pam Bondi didn't happen actually in a vacuum. On the same day, it was reported by Carol Leonnig at MSNBC that Tom Homan, the president's border czar, had been part of an investigation in which it was alleged that he took a bribe or was on the cusp of taking a bribe in order to, in return,
a $50,000 bag of cash at a Cava
in return for promising.
I love Cava. I imagine if you go to Cava and you could get a Cava bowl and $50,000
Would you like that with the brown rice?
You would go
I don't think Cava could get better, but that would make Cava better.
So what we learned was that the FBI said there wasn't enough evidence. So in the way that the judicial manual that I read earlier would have had it, is that the grace given to Tom Homan would also be given to the president's enemies, and or the scrutiny the president wants for his enemies would have been given to Tom Homan. So these two things, on the one hand, the judicial system looked favorably on the evidence or lack of evidence with respect to Homan. Will it apply the same standard? That's the way it's supposed to work. Those two things happen on the same day. I don't think that's, I don't think anybody really notices that, except it does seem interesting that we have those two examples, which fill out more fully the picture of this new use of the Justice Department the president is engaging in.
And of course, what you're talking about is retribution and reward. And in both instances, in both directions, you see the president's whims driving the decision making. At least that's what it looks like.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Quince. Quince, I am loving it as fall is coming in. Cooler temperatures. You can turn to Quince for fall staples that actually last, from cashmere to denim to boots. The quality holds up. The prices are unbeatable. I have been having such a good time with Quince here in the summer fall switchover. My son is got a homecoming dance coming up, and so he just got his first suit, and we got him shoes from Quince that are amazing. They're beautiful Oxfords, and they were so much cheaper than what we would have paid elsewhere. Meanwhile, I am wearing this black shirt that I got from Quince. Basically, I'm wearing it all the time in such a way that it is almost excessive because it's so comfortable. It fits me so well. I like how it looks so much. Quince has all kinds of fall staples that you're going to wear nonstop. So keep it classic and cool this fall with long-lasting staples from Quince. Go to quince.com/gabfest for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/gabfest to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/gabfest. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Bombas. Fall is here. Kids are back in school. My kid went back to school yesterday. Vacations are over. It's officially the start of cozy season, which means it's time to slide into some Bombas. I wear Bombas socks basically all the time, sometimes even to bed. I love that they have an L and an R on them, so I know which one is the left and the right. But mostly I love how incredibly soft and comfortable they are. So this fall season, treat yourself to Bombas soft materials, merino wool that keeps you warm when it's chilly but cool when it's hot, Supima cotton that's softer, stronger, and more breathable than regular cotton, and even rag wool, the thick, durable, classic cozy sock you'll want all fall. And Bombas doesn't stop at socks. They've got slippers that make it hard to leave the house. And the best part is that for every item you buy, Bombas donates one to someone experiencing homelessness. Head over to bombas.com/political and use code political for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/political, code political at checkout. Bombas.com/political and use code political. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Found. Do you ever feel like managing your business finances is a full-time job on top of your actual full-time job? You can change that today with Found. Found is a business banking platform that allows you to effortlessly track expenses, manage invoices, and prepare for taxes. You can even set aside money for different business goals and control spending with different virtual cards. One Found user said, Found is going to save me so much headache. It makes everything so much easier. Expenses, income, profits, taxes, invoices even. And Found has 30,000 5-star reviews just like this. Join the other small businesses who are loving Found. Found can even help identify tax write-offs, saving you money and time so you can focus on growing your business, chase new opportunities, and do the work you enjoy. Don't put this one off. Join thousands of small business owners who have streamlined their finances with Found. Open a Found account for free at found.com. That's FOUND.com. Found is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services are provided by Lead Bank, member FDIC. Can you imagine having President Trump as your OBGYN or pediatrician? I would just let's begin the segment as pausing to imagine what that would be like. It would be astonishing to have somebody like that. But that's kind of where we are. As the son of a doctor who was also a lifetime NIH researcher, I am just so profoundly demoralized by the spectacle unfolding around us, particularly the Monday spectacle of President Trump and basically the entire public health scientific leadership of the country, HHS Secretary Kennedy, the FDA commissioner, the director of NIH, conducting a kind of live rewriting of American health policy and practice as it relates to autism and as it relates to vaccination. The precipitating cause, I suppose, was autism, a condition whose diagnosis has vastly increased in the last generation for reasons that are confusing, like that may be simply diagnosis, or maybe there's something where the actual condition is increasing. But here we had Trump appearing to talk about autism, and in a very brief appearance, Trump declared that Tylenol in pregnancy was a likely cause of autism, that women should tough it out rather than take it, that another lightly tested drug, leucovorin, was an effective treatment, also that the MMR collective vaccines were dangerous and should be taken separately. And then also sort of in the wake of this, the FDA took an unprecedented step of relabeling leucovorin, this very lightly tested drug, as a treatment for autism, despite there being no company or organization really having submitted data confirming its effectiveness.
For instance, in cases of extremely high fever, that you feel you can't tough it out, you can't do it. I guess there's that. It's a small number of cases, I think. But if you can't tough it out, if you can't do it, that's what you're going to have to do. You'll take a Tylenol, but it'll be very sparingly. All pregnant women should talk to their doctors for more information about limiting the use of this medication while pregnant. So ideally, you don't take it at all. But if you can't tough it out, if there's a problem, you're going to end up doing it. And I will say there are parts of the world that don't take Tylenol. I mean, there's a rumor, and I don't know if it's so or not, that Cuba, they don't have Tylenol because they don't have the money for Tylenol, and they have virtually no autism, okay? Tell me about that one. And there are other parts of the world where they don't have Tylenol, where they don't have autism. That tells you a lot, and I want to say it right now. And, you know, the way I look at it, don't take it. Don't take it. There's no downside in not taking it. That's the way I feel. I've been very strong on the subject for a long time. You know, life is common sense, too. And there's a lot of common sense in this. And I wish things like this were brought up. And this group has worked so hard on it. But I'd like to be a little bit more, a little speedier in the process of a recommendation, because there's no harm in going quicker. There's absolutely no harm. At worst, there's no harm. Thank you very much, Bobby, please.
I mean, let's start, John. Why do you think autism is such a flashpoint for Kennedy and for the president?
We can't forget to go back to the original question you asked, Emily, because to me, the most extraordinary thing here is when we talk about norm breaking. One norm that I'm watching is that when a man has an opinion or a hot take about the experience of a woman and childbirth. They are best encouraged to keep that to themselves. And the idea that tough it out, which represents an evaluation of what a woman goes through in childbirth, is something you would say and not get and not cause significant political damage is surprising to me.
I don't know. We welcome being told what to do. I feel like the empathy and caring with which Donald Trump was speaking, I felt it all through my bones. I wanted him right by me through my pregnancy.
But there's also this sort of other subtext of it, which is to blame a woman who took Tylenol and then had a child that was autistic, to sort of say, well, it's your fault. I mean, like, also this sort of implicit blame in it all is so gross. Which by the way, one of the other hypotheses about what the autism surge is like very old fathers. Older fathers seem to be associated with higher rates of autism. So Donald Trump was an old dad. If one of his kids turned out to be autistic, should we be telling him, like, come on, man, why did you do that? Like, it's a little bit it's awful.
Also, the panic that women who are currently pregnant feel, both about Tylenol they have taken or Tylenol they would take. I mean, when we think about the effect of a presidency on a country, there are the things that he does that excite the imagination. There are the things that he does that change behavior. This is one that visits any pregnant woman every time she stands in front of the medicine cabinet. And so as a political matter, that is not a small thing, it seems to me. Anyway, the president has been focused on the idea of vaccines and autism, I feel like, since well before his first run. He flirted with the idea, when he was a candidate in, I think, 2015, and sort of walked away from it, feeling, I think, kind of having a spider sense that saying it out loud was possibly politically damaging. And so he definitely flirted with the idea that vaccines were causing autism. And there has been, an increase in autism spectrum disorder diagnoses, which are attributed to improved diagnostic methods, awareness, screening tools. And then I think this is also true, that actual increased incidence. So there is a question. But just because there's a question doesn't mean this is the answer. And I'll just, while I'm talking, one of the things that struck me as really singular was the president basically saying, like, this is what I feel. And talking about autism not happening among the Amish, which is like basically a debunked internet rumor, equivalent saying something similar about Cuba. Like, I mean, there's riffing, and then there's like whatever is less attached to facts, and that's what that press conference was.
I mean, I think, David, in answer to your question about why RFK Jr. and Trump have fastened onto this, they hate the public health establishment, right? I mean, there's this idea that the CDC, the FDA, the alphabet soup of science has been doing something like terrible all along. I mean, literally, that's what RFK Jr. is saying, that these institutions are to blame for America's health problems. And then you have autism, which is this kind of mystery that is hard for a lot of families to deal with. Why is this incidence rising? What is actually happening here? And so you just like glom those two things together and away we go. But the problem is the incredible harm that gets caused by putting forth these totally unproven, false beliefs about what's causing what and what you should do about it.
Yeah, there are 2 points I want to make on that. The harm caused. So as I read about, the administration actually had 31 hypotheses about the increase in autism that they wanted to explore. And they planned an announcement that they were going to work on new studies to investigate all of these different hypotheses. And they expected, and of which Tylenol was one of them. Tylenol was one of those 31. And in fact, there was this hope that the president wouldn't really talk about Tylenol. And the reason has been proven out, which is that the fact that the president talked about Tylenol means there's now this mass obsession with the Tylenol question. There's all these other possibly interesting investigative paths that are now going to have a much harder time being explored. And so the president's sort of petulant, impetuous obsession and pursuit of this has now distracted the public health establishment and distracted even these people, even this investigation his own administration wants to do is now going to be distracted by him away from all these other potential investigations. That's number one point I want to make. The second point is, like, I was very interested in the fast tracking of this drug, leucovorin. So leucovorin is a drug that's been it's related to sort of folic acid, and there's a sense that maybe women certainly need folic acid in pregnancy, and this drug may help children by helping with pathways related to folic acid. Very limited research, but might be helpful. And so, sure, is there anything wrong with relabeling it and encouraging people to take it? It may well be that this is a useful drug. The problem with this is that it takes time and energy and attention away from other potential therapies. And the decision is basically not made on the basis of some sort of scientific evidence. It's made based on the whims of a couple of people, a 79-year-old man with no medical experience, his heavily tanned HHS secretary, a bunch of lickspittles. They may be right. They may end up being right. But if you were a bettor and you said, we have 100 possible therapies to improve the lives of children with autism, you would probably bet that Trump and RFK Jr. are less likely to be right than a lot of smart, experienced people who have looked at this, who've studied this, directed money to lots of other studies in the past. History suggests that, like, a rigorous review carried out by expert scientists associated with NIH and other places are more likely to identify something that might be a breakthrough and might have progress, and better than the president throwing darts and picking one. He might end up being right. It would be great if leucovorin turns out to be a great therapy. But now we've put the government's force, attention, energy, money on this one drug without, and again, let's hope it's right. Let's hope it's right, because it's where people are going to spend a lot of time and money and get a lot of treatment from it.
More broadly, in situations where the stakes are high, the issues are complex, complicated, and require a high level of expertise, you want a system for...
Right. A system. A system.
Yeah. For dealing with stuff. Like, systemic thinking is not a wacky, woke ideology. And the dart at the dartboard, there's a blunt genius to certain presidents, and maybe even this one in some instances, that gets stuff moving by force of instinct. But it gets stuff moving, and then the system channels that energy and attention into, expert behavior, doesn't throw all of systemic thinking out the window. And here, the president's engagement is happening either to replace systemic thinking or way down the line from where it normally is applied in solving problems.
John, I love that elegant encapsulation of what I was trying to say. The word systemic thinking is very helpful. That is what I was looking for. That we've picked sort of the impetuous thinking of one man, who is the president, over systemic thinking. And there are a lot of people who believe that's better now. There's a lot of skepticism about the expertise and the expert hierarchies.
Sure, because of course, obviously, expert hierarchies, there's groupthink and all the rest of it. But failures of individual instances of systemic thinking don't mean you throw out the whole process.
I feel very concerned about what we are supposed to believe that our national health authorities are now telling us, right? I mean, we're now at this point where we have this, what looks like a totally unreliable vaccine advisory panel for that RFK Jr. has put into place. So far hasn't done like the worst possible things, but it's flirting with changes to the vaccine schedule that could be really bad. And Trump went way beyond that, talking about skepticism about the mumps, measles, rubella vaccine as a combination, which is how almost all babies take that vaccine. Then there's this crazy idea of delaying the hepatitis B vaccine until the age of 12, which would put children so at risk of hepatitis B.
That one is ridiculous.
It's so upsetting. And I guess we're just going to have to hope that, other bodies of medicine or international groups are going to step in here, and we're going to have to listen to them instead of our own national health bodies. I am so glad that my children are all already vaccinated, and this isn't going to be part of the cohort that they had to grow up with. It's just really, really upsetting. These were solved problems.
Just because it's in my head, I just want to note, in the same category, in the same family of issues, there's an amazing story. I think it's in the Washington Post about the new acting FEMA director and how he was unavailable during the first 24 hours of the floods because he was just like out on vacation. He just didn't want to. He was hanging out with his kids in his truck, and he, just wasn't available. And this goes against every practice of FEMA. And because he wasn't available, they were unable to get things approved that needed to be approved urgently because he was the only person who could get them in front of Kristi Noem, the DHS secretary, who was the only person allowed to sign these $100,000 plus contracts. And so there was this delay in FEMA's action. And the point was, like, here's this person who's appointed to be the expert head of FEMA. He doesn't have any expertise in emergency management to begin with. But then even as he comes into the job, he's like, the most important task of the FEMA director is to be available in case of emergency. He doesn't like to use his cell phone. He doesn't like to have his cell phone with him or government secure phones, and he puts them away when he's not working. And so here's this guy who's like, your job is to be available. And he's just like, no, I'm not going to be available. And that's sort of like in the same kind of category of like, yes, you say like, oh, this is a new bold choice. But like, if the new bold choice is not going to do the things that seem kind of foundational for the organization to exist and thrive, it's not going to work. Onward.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to get creative with your personal style and find the best arrivals for fall. I was just floating around on Saks's website, Saks.com, and I found all kinds of cute things, like a cool pair of sunglasses, a beanie cashmere hat by Gorski, socks that looked appealing, a Camilla bucket hat. So this fall, whether you're trying out the latest fashion trends or curating a closet that stands the test of time, Saks has you covered. Saks makes shopping feel personal. They have trusted in-store stylists who are there to guide and inspire you. And if you prefer online shopping, Saks.com offers a curated selection tailored to your taste, from new arrivals by your favorite designers to stylish pieces for your everyday needs. Whether it's date night, a vacation, a special occasion, or just lounging in style, Saks helps you find the perfect look for every occasion. If you want shopping to be fun and easy, then head to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to elevate your personal style every day.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Leesa. Are you intentional about what comes into your home? Does what comes into your home need to be beautiful, sustainable, and built to last? If so, check out Leesa Mattress. It's not just luxury comfort at a reasonable price. They prioritize doing good for the world, too. One of my Slate colleagues recently ordered a king-size Leesa Legend hybrid mattress. She picked it out after another Slatester recommended the Leesa brand. She said it was great for side sleepers, and she also mentioned that it absorbs movement really well. She couldn't tell if her partner was rolling over or getting in and out of bed, and she's waking up fewer times at night after using the Leesa mattress. Leesa mattresses are made with premium materials that deliver serious comfort and full body support no matter how you sleep. Plus, they back it all up with free shipping, easy returns, and a 100-night sleep trial. So go to Leesa.com for 25% off mattresses, plus get an extra $50 off with promo code GABFEST, exclusive for Gabfest listeners. That's LEESA.com, promo code GABFEST for 25% off mattresses, plus an extra $50 off. Be sure to enter our show name after checkout so they know we sent you. Leesa.com, promo code GABFEST. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Cornbread Hemp. If you're looking for a natural way to unwind, one that can also relieve aches and discomfort, it might be time to try CBD gummies from Cornbread Hemp. Cornbread Hemp's CBD gummies are made to help you feel better, whether it's from stress or discomfort or just needing a little relaxation. They're formulated to work with your body, not against it. And Cornbread Hemp's CBD gummies only use the best part of the hemp plant, the flower, for the purest and most potent CBD. All products are third-party lab tested and USDA organic to ensure safety and purity. And with Cornbread Hemp, you can count on fast shipping and reliable customer service. Right now, Gabfest listeners can save 30% off their first order. Just head to cornbreadhemp.com/Gabfest and use code GABFEST at checkout. That's cornbreadhemp.com/Gabfest, code Gabfest. We are joined by Gabfest friend and Bazelon mega friend, Beverly Gage. Beverly is a Yale historian and the author of that magnificent biography of J. Edgar Hoover that won all the prizes a couple of years ago. We asked her to join us after we had a kind of attenuated conversation about McCarthyism a couple of weeks ago in the context of the sort of post-Charlie Kirk assassination, what the consequences might be. We realized we didn't know very much about it and how much the Red Scare and McCarthyism can tell us about what is happening today. So, Bev, what was McCarthyism and the Red Scare briefly? Where did they come from? What were key features of them? Who was affected by them? We'll check back in 2 hours.
Exactly. Let me begin. I'm honored with the mega friend designation, I have to say.
Okay, but also we left out, okay, I'm going to say that the title of your book is G-Man, J. Edward... Let me type it out.
G-Man, HB1 visa.
Oh my God. I said that wrong like 10 times, just so you know. I am going to say that the title of Bev's book is G-Man, J. Edgar Hoover and the Making of the American Century, and that it won the Pulitzer. Okay, now you can answer David's question.
The name McCarthyism is a little bit misleading, I think, because it leads most people to think, okay, there was this one guy, Joe McCarthy, and he was a demagogue, and he went after communists, and he rose and fell, and that's how we ought to think about it. I think most historians now would say the Red Scare was something much bigger, much deeper, much more multifaceted, and that it lasted a lot longer than McCarthy's career. And I do think we have a little bit of a similar situation today in which we have one very powerful, and in this case, even more powerful figure at the center of it all. But things that are happening at many different levels: cultural, political, governmental, bureaucratic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
But so what was the Red Scare? What was the Red Scare?
Wait, stop. Be quiet. So when the Red Scare starts, we're talking about the 1940s, right? And an attack on the federal workforce. Can you start there?
When did the Red Scare start? So there were actually two Red Scares. One happened right in the wake of the Bolshevik Revolution around World War I, and that was actually really quite a ferocious Red Scare. It led to lots of deportations. It led to some of the most draconian speech laws we've ever seen in the United States, and that was really the moment that gave birth to the civil liberties reaction to Red Scare politics in the form of the ACLU. But when most people talk about the Red Scare, they're talking about this later period that really begins in the late 1930s in reaction to a big surge of activism in the United States, extends through World War II, and then hits its peak in the late 40s and early 50s.
Can we talk now, Emily?
Yes.
How much, one of the things that we were stumbling around was, to the extent that we're trying to learn from any comparisons that might be apt, was the Red Scare, let's call it that, in the second stage, did it have as a nourishing kind of like the radon rock in the basement that kept the thing nourished? Was the general fear about losing out to the communists, the Reds under the bed, the larger global fight? Whereas here you might have, so is that A, correct? And did that give it a kind of constant nourishment? And is that, do you see anything similar to that today? Or is that an important distinction of what makes today different?
Yeah, one of the hard parts, I think, about talking about anti-communism is that for most of the 20th century, basically everyone who was anyone in American political life was an anti-communist. And so, you think, so what was fueling all of that kind of repressive energy around the Red Scare? It turns out there were actually many varieties of anti-communist. And in fact, there became, by the 1950s into the 1960s, a whole group of people who identified themselves as anti-communists. So they were anti-communist, but they were more nor anti-communist, which is to say, they didn't like Joe McCarthy, they didn't like the Red Scare. So there's a lot of kind of confusion around this. And in that sense, I do think it's a little bit different from the present, because while you had all these varieties of anti-communist, nonetheless, there was a really core issue that everyone, with a few exceptions, said they were concerned about. And it encompassed just about everything in American life, from foreign policy and the Cold War and the global scene, to your views of labor politics or race at home, to which political party you joined. And so it was this big overarching language with which people kind of thought about and understood American politics. And I don't think we have anything like that today that is a kind of common language and a common set of ideas in the same way.
I mean, it also seems important that that was an external threat, right? And that there were real people spying for the communists inside the American government. And those also seem like they're not parallels for what's happening today, right?
That's one of the tricky pieces about looking at the Red Scare. So for a long time, really until the end of the Cold War, you could sort of only have two positions, right? Either everyone was innocent or everyone was guilty. And of course, it turns out that the story is a lot more complicated. So there were accusations about espionage, and some of those turned out to be quite true. You had this global, ferocious, bipolar conflict that was there between the United States and the Soviet Union, but was a very real conflict that had tentacles just about everywhere in the world. And so it's one of the hard things to puzzle out. And I think that you're right that the gravity of the actual situation and the actual threat that people were so concerned about is of a different scale than we're seeing in today's politics.
What were the ways in which people suffered during the Red Scare? What are the categories of punishments, difficulties that people had?
The most famous image, I think, that we have of the Red Scare is people hauled up in front of Congress being grilled by Joe McCarthy in the Senate or the House Un-American Activities Committee, being forced to answer, were you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Those congressional hearings were just one little piece of a really vast apparatus of repression that went after not only people in the party, but lots and lots of people who were only tangentially connected. So people lost their jobs. They ended up on blacklists, particularly in Hollywood. Their political careers certainly were ruined. And then I think, on a larger scale, a lot of the narrative of the 1950s was about a kind of chilling effect on speech, that people grew very afraid of putting their names on petitions, speaking out, saying anything that seemed like it might be too far left. And this had real personal consequences as well for friendships and alliances and all sorts of other things that make, life have an open and free texture.
I mean, one of the lessons that I've learned from your book and from talking to you is just that the cowing, the sort of chilling that you're talking about can happen without that many people actually experiencing the full effect of government power, right? I mean, you have I think small percentage of federal workers actually being fired for communist sympathies, or we should say there's also this huge anti-homosexual crusade that goes on that is horrible in its own way. But that small percentage just casts a vast shadow over so many people's speech and free conduct. And that's something I keep hearing from people now, that the number of people who are going to self-censor vastly outweighs the number of people who are actually going to be targeted by the government or even by these, more private kinds of firings or employment effects. And that is just such a hard fact to grapple with, because it just makes you realize how fragile these freedoms are and how easy it is to destabilize them.
That's absolutely right. And it's really hard to quantify, right? what wasn't said, what wasn't thought, what wasn't signed, what wasn't proposed. Those are very hard things to describe, but that is certainly a big picture story of what happened during the Red Scare. And you can see it happening today. And you're right. It doesn't actually take very many examples of punishment or deportation or jailing or public humiliation or firing or any of the other consequences that are the result of this kind of political crackdown to make everyone else step back and stay quiet.
Was it overreach in the end that caused the passion behind the Red Scare to wane in its second iteration, or was it the Soviet Union becoming less powerful, or just people moving on and getting fixated on something else in America?
It is hard to sustain these kinds of high energies and political passions and sense of crisis, right? Year after year after year. So the Red Scare had its real peak from 1950 to 1954. Those were the years when Joe McCarthy was really out front. And as you say, some of that was being driven by very dramatic global events. The Soviets getting the nuclear bomb in 1949, the revolution in China, espionage revelations in the United States. And some of that did calm down. The Korean War is another one, came to an end by the mid-1950s. But there was also a really concerted campaign to change American opinion, to push back against people like Joe McCarthy. And you do see that beginning to have a pretty dramatic effect as his career goes on. Members of the press, Edward R. Murrow most famously, come out and denounce him after all of these years of remaining silent and being afraid. And other groups begin to push back through lawsuits that ultimately become more successful at the Supreme Court and elsewhere.
So if you were giving advice to a progressive organization or a fellow university professor or some young student who's anxious about what they might say at this moment, what advice would you give about how to undermine the bullying or the blue scare tactics that we see coming from Trump? What is it that people can do at an individual level to help make this weaker, help make this less effective, help make it burn out sooner?
Well, first, I'd say really think about the wide range of tools that are being used in this moment. And that ranges from, very formal mechanisms of government power to, of course, online discourse and attacks, to firings, to kind of political struggle. And I think if you want to push back against it, you have to have a strategy and an understanding of where the best levers are. It might be yelling at people on Twitter, but, I would venture to say that it also might not be. So that's one thing. I think you have to really understand the full situation and think about what you have on your side that might actually be useful. And then I think you got to think about alliances, right? Who are you trying to persuade? Who do you want on your side? How are you going to kind of build this alternate way of understanding what's happening and creating pressure points that is going to be sustainable? And so that's something that you saw happening during the Red Scare, right? Old alliances flew apart in the early parts as people started pointing fingers and turning on each other and naming names. But ultimately, they had to figure out a way to come back together. And in that case, it was particularly liberals and leftists who had to figure out a way to find common cause and not to get kind of sucked into the world of denouncing each other and blaming each other and pointing fingers.
One thing I've been thinking about a lot is the difference between McCarthy, who was a senator and had this committee, and Donald Trump, who is the president and has these executive powers to which the Supreme Court seems to be adding every day. How do you take that into account? Because it seems in the end that President Eisenhower actually played a role in helping to bring down McCarthy by deciding he'd gone too far when McCarthy started attacking the army. We don't have a kind of figure over Donald Trump to denounce him. So how does that affect your thinking about the historical parallels to what's happening now?
I think it's the big difference. I mean, McCarthy was more popular than most people understand him to have been. And for a long time, he was really quite popular. He had a big role to play in the Republican Party, and many people thought he was kind of the factor that helped win the 1952 election for the Republicans. They had been out of power for 20 years at that point. And so this was a pretty big deal. But of course, he was just one senator. He had nothing like the executive power that Trump has. He has nothing like the popularity and influence that Trump has, certainly within his own movement. And as you say, Eisenhower was really important. He didn't like McCarthy, and he was one of the big factors in helping to bring McCarthy down. A faction within the Republican Party really turned on McCarthy. They thought that he was dangerous and he was a demagogue and he was an embarrassment. And it was that coalition within the Republican Party that was absolutely crucial to his political fate.
Beverly Gage is a historian at Yale and the author of G-Man. I learned it. I learned the title, Emily. It's also on my bookshelf right behind me. Bev, thanks so much for coming on and giving us a history lesson.
Takes up a lot of space there, right? Yeah.
Worth every inch.
Let us go to Cocktail Chatter. John, when you're having a white Russian with your commie friends this weekend, I guess a white Russian. If you were a commie, you wouldn't have a white Russian. You'd have a red Russian.
If you were a commie, wouldn't it just be a white?
Why a white?
Because you're already the Russian. So, like, you don't need to identify.
Huh. But I think
I guess you could be a non-Russian commie. You could be living in
red.
Dubuque.
You should have what's a nice red cocktail? I don't even know. If you're having a nice red cocktail with your commie friends, John, what are you going to be chattering about?
There are many. I was hovering over many things, but I got. If I were a good novelist or short story writer, I was captivated by the Brady Bunch house, which is open to the public for the first time for 3 days to raise money for shelter dogs, which is great. But what I learned in the course of that is that the Brady Bunch, which was a 70s sitcom that was very important
60s.
to those of us.
I think it's 60s. I think we think it's 70s, but it was 60s.
Well, I think it appeared through the 70s anyway.
I'm going to Google this right now.
It's definitely referred to as a beloved 70s sitcom. So anyway, the point of it is that this is a big part of our growing up. Okay, fine.
You're now, right. I am 100% wrong. 100% wrong. 112% wrong. It starts in 1969 and ends in 74. I apologize.
The H4B1 hike visa. Anyway, the fact of the matter is that the house is a character in the sitcom, and I'm not well versed enough to be able to say much more than that, except as having watched it, much of it took place in the house. And there was this establishment shot at the beginning, which is of this house, which many of my friends, I'd bike to their houses and it would look like that. And there's a station wagon in front, which is very much of its time. So the house plays this role, but the house was just an exterior shot. The rest of the action that took place was done on a lot in, whatever, I don't know, Beverly Hills or something. Anyway, somewhere in Hollywood. Okay, so then HGTV decides we're gonna take the actual house that was used as the external house and redo every internal room so it looks like the fake rooms that were created on the lot. So they did so, and so it's a real house that was supposed to look like real life, but then was about a sitcom that was fake because it was on a lot, being retrofitted to look like the fake house, but which is now an actual real house, except that it's not actually real because the appliances don't work. Apparently, it's just owned as kind of like a dollhouse. But the lines there between what is fake and what is real, and what became such a real memory for the viewers in its fakeness that was supposed to look real, that they then had to create a real house that looked like the fake thing. It seems to me to be the kind of multi-generational nostalgia memory soup that a great writer could could work with. I don't know in what context, but anyway, it sort of captivated me, this attention that is being given to this house that is obviously a passion project for people who grew up watching the sitcom as we did
in the 60s. Yeah.
I'm just glad to hear there's a show that's not a British procedural that is actually like.
Can you imagine? There would be, if you combine the Brady Bunch with some kind of British procedural, where there'd be like murders that would take place in Hawaii while they're in a station wagon.
But the
it
thing
was a very
about,
specific house, right? Because Mike Brady was an architect. That's
Precisely.
another part of that show.
Yeah.
And it was like had this whole downstairs, and like his study was a big part of that house.
Well,
right?
that always, exactly. The fact that he was in his study a lot, working on that cool architect's desk, to me was because most men went to offices, but he was doing, and I think he went to an office too, but like he was working on those plans on the weekend too.
Were they both widowed? I mean, he was a widower, but was she widowed?
I think it's super vague. We don't really know like what happened to their previous.
Yeah, it's a little weird how they don't talk ever. It never appears. They never.
Yeah,
it's never
like
oh, remember when mom was like.
It's like in the bathrooms. Yeah. They shot the bathrooms, but they never shot the toilets.
Yeah.
There are things they kept out of the conversation.
Maybe the pilot episode refers to it briefly. I'm sorry that I know so much about the Brady Bunch, but I watched it over and over and over again. I will say that my own children completely disinterested. Every attempt to get them to watch it failed.
Well, that seems reasonable.
Yeah, totally.
I don't think there's I think it was unique to our experience. You can't bolt that on them.
No, 100%, but also like why I'm not sure why it resonated so much. Anyway,
well, it definitely,
we are all, God, we're not going to do a whole segment about the Brady Bunch, but we're all young enough that we weren't really watching it when it was airing originally, because it was it was over by 74. Yeah. So I remember my entire memory of the Brady Bunch is being homesick and watching it. Like that, if I was homesick, I would watch the Brady Bunch. But it was never being watched.
So it was a treat of
in
sorts.
Philadelphia, it was on between, I don't know, like 3:30 and 4:30 every day. And so we watched it after school when we were home from school, to the despair of my mother, which fair enough, because it's completely sexist.
What's your chatter, Emily? Won't be as interesting as this.
My chatter is about this wonderful swim on the Chicago River that happened last weekend, where for the first time since 1926, there was this big organized long swim. This river had been dreadfully polluted and smelly, and lots of Chicago residents could not imagine anything worse than even dipping a toe in it. But now it's really pretty clean. And so hundreds of swimmers went into this river and swam past like neighborhoods they lived in. And there's wildlife like ospreys and otters that are back on this river. And I love a story about an urban setting in which people are seeing where they live or where they go every day from a different kind of vantage point. And there's like a mixing of wildlife and natural, what we think of as like the real environment with the city. And so this just seemed like a wonderful example of this. I loved seeing all the photos.
I had so many chatters this week. I'm just do a couple of cultural consumption ones. Number one, my girlfriend and I are watching a show that we somehow never watched before, Better Call Saul, which we just started watching. Oh my God.
Never watched that.
I know. We'd watched Breaking Bad last year, but then I wanted to break from that world, and so we didn't pick it up immediately. And I think the second episode of Better Call Saul, there's a kind of a negotiation in the desert, which is one of the greatest scenes I've ever seen of anything ever. And it's a fantastic show based on the first 4 episodes. So if you haven't given it a shot, give it a shot. The other is our new producer, Nina Porzucchi. We were talking. I asked her what podcast she listens to, and she mentioned a podcast called The Turning. And I've been listening to The Turning, and it's such an interesting podcast. So there's now been 3 series, and each series is kind of about an organization where idealistic women and girls are put through really unpleasant experiences. So the first season is about Mother Teresa's organization, the Missionaries of Charity, and what it was like to serve in that organization, which does so much for the poor, but also was an extremely challenging environment. And then there's the third series is about a church/cult in Minnesota called River Road, where there was an abusive leader who abused the girls who were in families in the organization. All just very sensitive, basically told through the stories of women talking, looking back, 10, 20, 30 years on their lives, and just great humane podcast. So The Turning, check it out. Listeners, have you got chatters? You have chatters. Please email them to us at gabfest@slate.com. Please keep them coming, gabfest@slate.com. And our chatter this week comes from Nate Osler, calling from Georgia, but not our Georgia, the other Georgia.
Hello, Gabfest. This is Nate Ostler. I'm calling from Tbilisi, Georgia, but I'm originally from the Bay Area. And my chatter is about the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Russia's Tatarstan region, which has a factory work program that actively recruits migrant women from around the world in this kind of work-study program where they work and learn Russian. And they have a very slick advertising campaign with the odd Twitter account that uses a lot of AI material, but they miss out on the fact that these women are going there to create drones, which are then used to attack Ukraine. And often their passports are taken away from them when they get there. And it's just such a dark and cynical thing. I really encourage everyone to check out their Twitter account and their advertising material.
That's all for our episode this week. But we also have a bonus episode in your feed, H-1B visas. Should people have to pay $100,000 to get them? That's just for Slate Plus members, though, that conversation. And you can be a Slate Plus member if you go to the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or go to slate.com/Gabfest Plus. And you will also get bonus episodes from other Slate podcasts. You'll never hit the paywall on the Slate site, and you'll get discounts to live shows. And we are really, really on the verge of having some live shows to announce coming up in the fall and winter. So please get ready for that by becoming a Slate Plus member. We are not the only Slate podcast, however. You could also listen to Death, Sex, and Money. There's an episode this week, From Brazilian Butt Lifts to Botox, Your Beauty Confessions, where Anna Sale talks to listeners about their own choices, from a guy who spent $43,000 on plastic surgery, or Caroline, who used fillers and Botox after her divorce but can no longer afford them, to Alexandra, who stopped dyeing her gray hair at 38. So check out Death, Sex, and Money on Brazilian Butt Lifts. And this is our last week with our producer, Cheyna Roth. Cheyna has been with us, I don't even know, 3 years, 4 years, 7 years? Who can say? And it's been a joy working with her. And Shayna's staying at Slate. She remains at Slate. She's working on other projects, including Karen Feeding, and she'll tell us in 1 second. But Cheyna, thank you so much for supporting us and producing us and guiding us for all these years.
I've had an amazing time.
Oh
I
my
love you
God.
guys.
We love you too. And we'll be
with
listening with great
seriously.
interest.
Yeah, we are so grateful, Cheyna. Thank you. And I am particularly grateful. Perhaps it's for all the work we did together. I mean, this is a separate thing, but on Navel Gazing, season 2 is coming somehow. But I'm just saying that I have an extra special relationship with Cheyna because she had to fucking listen to that. So thank you for all the work on the Gabfest and all of our idiosyncrasies and complications, and then the little extra help for all the navel gazing work.
Thank you guys so much. I've had a really great time working with all of you. I'm very sad to be leaving.
Well, I'm sure hear from Cheyna. If you are a Slate podcast listener, Cheyna will be all up in your feed in all different ways.
Absolutely.
So I know you can always, I'm sure you'll be back. I'm sure they'll pull you back in.
Oh, I'll be filling in here and there. You guys are never going to be fully rid of me, obviously.
And vice versa.
All right. Now we got to get to the rest of the credits. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. Milo Bell, EP of Slate Podcasts. That's Executive Producer. Hillary Fry is EIC, Editor-in-Chief of Slate. For Emily Bazelon, John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to get creative with your personal style and find the best arrivals for fall. I was just floating around on Saks's website, Saks.com, and I found all kinds of cute things, like a cool pair of sunglasses, a beanie cashmere hat by Gorski, socks that looked appealing, a Camilla bucket hat. So this fall, whether you're trying out the latest fashion trends or curating a closet that stands the test of time, Saks has you covered. Saks makes shopping feel personal. They have trusted in-store stylists who are there to guide and inspire you. And if you prefer online shopping, Saks.com offers a curated selection tailored to your taste, from new arrivals by your favorite designers to stylish pieces for your everyday needs. Whether it's date night, a vacation, a special occasion, or just lounging in style, Saks helps you find the perfect look for every occasion. If you want shopping to be fun and easy, then head to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to elevate your personal style every day.
Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise.